Okay, so I was hoping that we can do 2 sessions today, so that tomorrow we do 2 others and then we are done. But let's see how we manage our time. So first of all, to everyone, I want to first of all thank you for your very kind messages when I lost my uncle. It has been a really tough 1 month. We lost him, unfortunately, but yeah, life goes on. And I really want to apologize for the disruption in the timetable. And I thank you also again for being very understanding and giving me this time to complete the module. Like I said earlier, the content isn't much. So we should be, if we do 2 sessions today and 2 sessions tomorrow, we should be done and I should be able to give you the final assessment. I have also increased the time for the hand-in to tomorrow. I think the latest is 2nd September. So if anyone had not yet submitted the presentation, you can go ahead and submit it. So with that, let's begin our lecture. Today, the last lecture we had was on stakeholders. So today, we want to sort of transition from stakeholders to the ethics part. Why? Among the stakeholders is the ICT department. And one of the key points with the ICT department in looking at stakeholders is the ethical element. So we want to see the level of responsibility ICT would need to have with the stakeholders involved. So what essentially we want to look at today is, these are just some of the key points that we want to look at. We want to understand who the IT or ICT professional is. Although we don't actually have an established ICT profession, the way we'd have a medical profession or and others like CPA, the accounts profession, and so on and so forth. But however, the ICT side, the IT profession side also has its standard, may not have a declared level of standards, but there are certain requirements that are expected of you. So we want to look at who the IT profession is and the kind of relationship this IT profession will have with different stakeholders and how they should manage those relationships. Those essentially, when we look at managing those relationships, we're looking at the ethical elements, those ethical elements that an ICT profession must keep in mind to essentially have that good working relationship with others. So these are just basically the things we want to look at. But first, we start with stakeholder analysis. Why? Because in stakeholder analysis, we understand the different key, ICT would know who are the people they are responsible to, who are the people they need to have a relationship with. So we looked at something last week. So we actually, even I remember, I think I gave you an article which can help you carry out a stakeholder analysis. But to formally understand what it is essentially what you're trying to do is to understand those particular individuals or groups of people that are going to be affected by a system or a policy that ICT is going to implement. Yeah. So when you're carrying out an analysis, you're trying to gather information about those individuals or groups of people that have a stake in your system or policy. Yeah. So essentially remember that this system is going to interact with certain people. So you need to know who these people are, how are they going to be affected, who are going to be the most important people that really need to be handled with care. Now, when you're carrying out a stakeholder analysis, you look at things like knowledge. What is the knowledge? What is the knowledge level of your stakeholder? So in terms of, first of all, with the processes that are going to be carried out, the system, the policy, and so on and so forth, what is their interest what would be their position be? Would they most likely be for or against? Who would be your most important ally in the situation, and what kind of power do they hold? Now, when you carry out that analysis, the issue of power is extremely important, because those with greater power, you would then rate them as the key players. Those with the lowest power, you rate them as least important, but still are not neglected, because they too can cause an effect. So when you're to carry out the stakeholder analysis, you have to plan the process. Just like anything, when you're going to do benchmarking and so on and so forth, you must have timelines, you must have targets, you must have a working group that is going to carry out the analysis. There must be certain key questions that need to be asked. Just like benchmarking, we do the same thing. I'll give a list of questions that are asked. So you develop a plan and a timeline. So in this time, the working group identifies the steps they are going to take to carry out the analysis, and they identify the timeline that it's going to take to carry out this analysis. Now, when you're identifying your stakeholders, think of the people who will be affected by whatever it is you're going to do, whether implementing a new system or a new policy. Whatever it is, you identify those people who can make it successful, or those who can break it. Develop a list, then you prioritize them basing on who will have the greatest impact. You may have an expert on your work group who may be able to identify, who may be able to show you, or maybe even to point out stakeholders that you may not realize how important they may be. But these are key points. So once you prioritize, this is when you identify those who are those who are your key players, and those who are at the bottom but still need to be monitored. So those at the highest level, your intention is to keep them satisfied, yeah, that their needs are answered by whatever it is you want to implement. Then manage them closely as you carry out implementation to ensure that their needs are answered, their concerns are answered throughout. Those at the low level need to be monitored, yeah, those need to be monitored, but they must also be kept informed of any change that is going on. They also need to be informed. So we don't list them at the bottom with the intention of kicking them out. You list them still, but you know exactly what activities you need to carry out with those who may be of a lower priority. So as you're carrying out your analysis, some of the things that you may need to understand about your key stakeholders, you want to know how they are likely to feel or react to your project. So you need to preempt, and then also have a discussion with them, or an interview, and some kind of engagement. You must have some kind of engagement and communication with your key stakeholders about the project that needs to be implemented. Look at the key questions that you may need to ask as you're carrying out your analysis. What may be of financial interest? Yeah. Is it positive or is it negative? Or what about the emotional side? What motivates them? What information do they want from you? How do you want to receive how do they want to receive the information? What is the best way to communicate? You can simply go through some of these questions. Essentially, the questions are there for you to understand the needs of the key stakeholders and even the lower stakeholders, and for you to be able to answer them, in relation to the system that is being implemented, or policy, whatever it is that is being introduced. So why is a stakeholder analysis important in an ICT implementation? One, the first and foremost, the most important thing is that you need support as you implement your project. You basically need support from your key stakeholders. For example, if your users are not ready to take on a system, they will fail it. Yeah. If management does not give you support, most likely you will not have any financial support as you carry out your implementation. I remember for me, as the projects, whatever project we're going to implement in ICT, I remember people would come up and say, if we need anything from management, let's find our own money. Otherwise, we're never getting support. You know, so those attitudes basically told you that you are not going to get the necessary support from management. And once you had all the necessary support for anything, then you'd see any financial support in case you're going to do a training, whatever resources that were needed, they would provide them for you as quickly as possible. So the key point is that you need support for your project as you implement it. So the quality of your project depends on the support of the stakeholders. ICT, and this is where now you as heads of ICT, you kind of grow, you mature from looking at ICT as just as the people the technicians who bring in new systems and so on and so forth. But essentially you're looking at bridging that gap. So there's here a question: how best do you deal with stakeholders who lose interest in the work at hand, whatever reason? Okay, how best would you deal with stakeholders who lose interest? First and foremost, what I would suggest is, if a project is aligned to the business objectives, the business objectives of an organization, then you will get the support. Even if you have, because we have seen situations where you have a management team or those at the top level who may not necessarily be interested in the good of an organization. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of, for myself when I was head ICT. I remember one of the things we sat down and thought about was, as ICT was e-learning, because we said the business of this university is teaching and learning. And in all sincerity, that's what we need to focus on. And I remember we said, okay, let's go ahead and set up an e-learning system. But we really didn't have support from management per se. But where did we have the support? From middle management. The deans, the lecturers, those were interested. So we said, let's start with those. And when we started with those, they slowly began to pick up. And when COVID hit, that's when management got up and realized, oh, this is an area, this is something that is actually helpful. But initially when we started, we basically had no support from management. But what we did, we started with the middle management, the deans, the lecturers, this was something that was actually of interest to them. So Sir Geoffrey is asking, I'm no longer head ICT. For sure, Geoffrey, I'm no longer head ICT. I resigned in January 2021 so that I could focus on family business. And that this is where I am now. So yeah, so basically, for me, that was one strategy that I used. If the project is aligned to the organization's business objectives, you will have someone for sure who has an interest in that business and wants to move it forward. So once you indicate how it is aligned to that, the support will come, especially from, would I say, the powerful stakeholders. Yeah. For example, now at UMU, one of some really powerful stakeholders are the professors, the deans, the professors, those PhD holders, because they're the ones who are basically driving the teaching and learning process. Yeah, so I think I've answered you, Saleh. So it's very important that you align your projects towards the ICT strategy. This is why this particular module is actually pulling in every different corner whatever module we've done, it's basically pulling it in. So essentially, what we are trying to avoid when we involve stakeholders, we want to avoid negative opinions. The negative opinions may come, you can't get rid of them, but if your objective is aligned to the business objectives, with time you win over those who have of a negative opinion. So let's just have a review of these stakeholders, because then it leads to our next subject, which looks at our IT workers. So when we look at stakeholders, the ones we looked at in the previous lecture, we said we have both internal and external. So the external, these are, you may be your donors, government legislatures, and so your consumers, your suppliers. But when we come to the internal part, you have you have the users, yes, but then you also have the ICT department. Yeah, you have the ICT department. So within the ICT department, you have your IT workers. So these IT workers are key in implementing ICT projects. Now, who are these IT workers specifically? Well, you find their programmers, you have your system analysts, system engineers, your database administrators, so on. You know what exists in your different departments. So what you have, you have people who are specializing in certain areas and skills in the IT profession. Now, when we look at the term profession, we see these are people who have specialized knowledge. Now, this is not normally the case with IT. Sometimes you find IT people are cross-cutting. There's someone who is good at networks at the same time as systems, and there are those who really want to focus on programming and not necessarily systems. So usually IT people are not stuck to one particular thing. And when we use the term profession, we normally think of people who adhere to a certain strict code of conduct. For example, the people in the medical profession. So you find they have a certain obligations that they have, which may not necessarily exist in IT. So when we look at IT, we don't necessarily have professions, but we're not licensed, but we do have certain ethical obligations that we must have. And this is what we want to discuss, because this defines ICT's relationship that some of the underlying issues we need to think about when we're looking at the stakeholder analysis. So IT professionals, you will have a relationship with your employer. You'll have a relationship with your clients, with the suppliers, there are other professionals, IT users, society at large. You will have that relationship. Let me just have something that came to mind. I remember there was something that came to mind. When I was head ICT, even before I was head ICT, I remember when I was at UMO. And when I first came to lecture at UMO, I was on the academic side. I remember then the ICT department made a decision to, because of UMO being a Catholic institution that was pushing forward ethical values, they decided to block pornographic materials on the university network. So usually if someone tried to access a pornographic website, a big signpost would come on a yellow page with a bishop holding a crucifix saying, UMO does not support porn. Now, of course, like most people, as you know, these filters that you put are not 100% efficient. So there are times they also block legitimate websites. So I remember a discussion happened when on the university mail system when one of the lecturers complained that she was trying to access a research page and a research site, and it stopped, and they stopped, and it was blocked. And she was pointing out this was about health science. And then a discussion went forward where others said, but who is that? Who has the right to stop me from accessing what I want to access, and so on and so forth. So now when I came in as head ICT, this issue came up again. And we put up an argument as ICT. We said, okay, number one, we are trying to come up with a policy. I think management can come out and state. But we said, number two, if we block a site, and then tomorrow you have a researcher who is doing research maybe on pornography, what happens? Remember, we are supposed to be a teaching, research and learning institution. Do we have the right to stop if somebody is doing something in this area? So you realize as ICT professionals, this was not on our side, but because we are dealing with academics and researchers, we don't necessarily have, we can't simply say, oh, block this or block that. And I remember they told us, oh, block torrents. And then we said, yeah, okay, we can block torrents, but what about YouTube? And we're using it as well. So yeah, Leon is laughing at the whole bishop holding a crucifix. Yeah, but that was then. But you realize now as ICT professionals, well, for us, it's a unique situation because it's a university. But within your institution, within your organization, you realize you're serving other professionals. And you also need to adhere to to whatever codes of conduct that drives them. So now, when you look at all the people that your ICT is dealing with, you have a question then is, how does ICT then dispense its duties when dealing with all these other stakeholders that we list here? How does the ICT department basically deal with that? So we then come to the question of what ethics is. So basically it is the moral standards that guide us, those moral standards that guide us. I remember the first time I went for a job and they saw my first degree, the person thought, would you be looking over my shoulders to see if what I'm doing is wrong? I said, no, these are just things that guide me as a person. I'm not going to be looking over your shoulders. So essentially, they guide the individual. They are not things that are there to stop one from behaving in a certain way. So, and these standards essentially guide the individual on the right and wrong practices. Like, what are the ways that which way should I deal with somebody here? I'm seeing some comments here. So that I tried to block porn, but colleagues told me that porn is not bad. Okay, people have different opinions on that. So, but when it comes to the ethical part, essentially what it does is to guide you on how to carry out those moral standards. But however, also on the other side, the ethics we are considering, also those moral standards, you also ensure that as ICT, the infrastructure you're putting up also does not, that also protects the rights of others. It protects the rights of others. It also protects the things that are of value to the organization or the institution, wherever it is that you're working. Ethics also enjoins with the virtues of honesty, compassion, and loyalty. So just a simple thing, for example, as when let's say talk about compassion, to not allow that somebody is abused using the network. We have heard of things like cyberbullying and so on and so forth. So just maybe as ICT to know that you have certain standards that stop certain things from happening. If any of you has developed an ICT policy, you know that you put up certain policy guidelines to ensure, let's say, that email is not abused, that the network is not abused, that certain data is protected. and the certain data is also classified. You classify it to indicate that this is private, this is confidential, or this is restricted, this is public data, so that you ensure that even once that is classified, you protect that which is not supposed to be accessed by everyone. So for the ICT profession, what we're trying to do is to try and see that ICT professionals understand how they are going to relate with the different stakeholders that are attached to the organization. Now, the policy essentially is the different policies that we have, and even if possible, you may even indicate some a document which specifically spells out ethical practices, to say that this is how all staff should behave. This is how ICT staff are supposed to behave as regards anything that is in their custody. And also this is how all staff should behave with whatever information that they may come across. I remember there was a time, there are situations where somebody gets their laptop and gives a personal laptop and hands it over to ICT. And ICT can have access to their data. They can get this data and misuse it in any way. So there are some certain ethical guidelines that must be, should they say, instilled in all ICT professionals. So now, let's look at just the different stakeholders. Let's start with the employees. What kind of relationship would you consider? So in this situation, you'd think of anything that may bring about anything that may be illegal. For example, if we're looking at software, if we're looking at data, yeah. So it's something that we all see, especially us in Africa. This is a very touchy subject, the issue of pirated software. We may write it in our policies, but in practice, it is something else. However, it is an issue. It is an issue that if, for example, if your organization at a certain point, Microsoft just came in and found that you have pirated software, it would be a huge embarrassment. Yeah, leave aside the let's say the fines that may be attached to your organization, but of course there's also the issue of that embarrassment that comes with it. Now we don't have anything, unfortunately, any organization that actually enforces it. However, there are some certain international organizations like the Business Software Alliance, which tries to enforce the unauthorized use of certain softwares. But in Africa, essentially, we don't have such an organization. And also, when we have things like ethics, there are also people on the other side who say that, you know what, in Africa, it's unethical to expect us to pay for licensed software. Yeah, so sorry about that, sorry. So essentially, when this particular business alliance has certain members, and this is the current list so far. Sometimes we find, whatever the case, you'll find pirated software exists, but that is the way life is. Again, the IT profession and the employee. The other important part would be trade secrets, or basically this comes down to data confidentiality, being able to keep your data, especially essential data, confidential. So here, this should be well spelled out in the policy. The policy clearly should state what data should be restricted and who should have access to it, so that when you are going to implement any system, when you're designing and implementing any system, the policy should be the guideline to ensure that this information is kept intact from those who shouldn't access it, both internally and externally. And the policy should actually indicate the measures that are supposed to be taken to ensure that certain information is kept confidential. Clients, IT professions and clients. So here when we're looking at your clients, we are saying who is ICT serving. So for example, at UMU, who does ICT serve? It serves staff and students. And there are always questions like, okay, if a staff member brings a personal computer or a personal laptop, what should I do? Should I charge a fee or something like that? Because it's essentially not supposed to be. So I remember we used to say, okay, let's put it in policy that ICT is only supposed to handle ABCD. Anything other than that should be done at my own personal time and so on and so forth. So one of the things to handle is to have contractual terms to ensure that everything is clear to all parties, that this is how far I can go as an ICT profession. If you want me to go further, then there must be some form of compensation that is there. So that contract, so it can be done in terms of a contract, in terms of a policy, something to guide you on what ICT should do when they are dealing with a client. If it is a new system, exactly up to which point should you deal with the client as far as that new system is concerned. So when you have your ICT projects, these contractual terms are extremely important, especially when you have a third party. I remember again when I think back to my days of head ICT and the issues of Zenode came up. And I remember we would be told, as ICT were being told, give support for Zenode, until at a certain point as head ICT, I said, no, we're not giving support for a system which we have basically no back-end access to. I remember as head ICT, I remember I got up and said, no, myself and my team, we're not handling anything to do with Zenode. I said, number one, where's the contractual agreement? Number two, we don't even have those access rights. So I said, absolutely no. So those are some of those contractual terms that need to be aired out to guide the ICT department. And for me, as I remember, that's one of the things that really, that I stood up for while I was still head ICT. The suppliers. Now, this one is a key point, especially being fair to suppliers. For me, I remember when I was head ICT, this was to have a good relationship with those suppliers was extremely important. You could get, I remember I got really good advice from suppliers. We could have a good discussion on something, especially wanted to get a certain piece of equipment. That relationship was really important. Also, the other key point was that in terms of payment, because as ICT, you have to ensure, the suppliers are given what they must be given. They must be paid for what they have supplied on time. Because otherwise, the next time you go rushing to this person you're in need, the person will not give you something on credit, things like that. So that good relationship is extremely important between ICT and any supplier, especially as somebody supplying ICT services or equipment. I remember one of the relationships that was extremely important for me was the internet service provider, Renu. That one was extremely important. And even now, you can see it's extremely important. So the ethical parties avoid things like bribery, trying to bribe or receive a bribe from a supplier. So you can go back and look at what Uganda's law says about bribery, although this is essentially part and parcel of should I say, the Ugandan culture, but it's an extremely important one to remember as we think about relationships with suppliers. So one of the things maybe we should understand is something may be a gift and rather not a bribe, but we should understand clearly what it is. You can look at this slide to understand the difference between a gift and a bribe, that it's not going to cause unnecessary, or should I say, is going to require you to provide more than you should be providing. Then the IT professional relationship with other professions. So here I'd already given you a detailed example of how to deal with other professionals as IT. I gave you the example of UMU and where the university stood, but then you have the academic staff who have a different mindset on how things should be. So essentially also looking at the sharing of corporate information. Look at things like, how do you treat other professionals? If let's say, for example, I was seated at a Reno conference and I'm sitting with other ICT heads, how am I talking about UMU? How am I discussing these different aspects? If the accountant has called me to his desk and the chief finance officer, and I happen to view the salary of somebody, and how do I go back and repeat that kind of information? You know, that kind of situation. Do I have the ability to hack into HR's payroll system, and then I inflate my salary or somebody else's salary? No, things like that. Relationship with the users. So this one is, of course, the users is it's a very delicate situation. You've had, I'm sure many of you have had a discussion. You've had users of your network say, but me, these ICT people, they don't understand them. I call them here for something. The person doesn't say anything, just touches something, then goes away. There's usually a need. ICT people are not usually very talkative. They want to come solve the situation and they go away. But the users are human beings. They also may need to understand, if something is not working, did I do something wrong? Is it because of my inability? Maybe my ICT literacy levels and things like that. So even just having a simple courtesy of this, let's say, let me explain what is going on. If there's been a misuse somewhere, just explain to somebody without necessarily putting them down, you know, things like that. Basically easing the fears of users. Users usually have very limited ICT literacy levels in comparison to you, the IT profession. So one of the things we need to establish is that supportive behavior, and that when you're there to support the user, when you understand their needs and capabilities. So that is a key point. The ICT profession and the society, yeah? So here, essentially, we are basically looking at the society in general. What are some of the things that we may do that may cause harm to society? Simple things like, there are subjects that are coming up now, like e-waste. That if I'm the head of the ICT department, do we have an e-waste policy? Do we have something where we handle how we are going to dispose of our old computers that have become obsolete? How do we ethically dispose of them that we do not cause harm to the environment? How are we behaving with the equipment that we have? Are we part of the criminal activities that go on? For example, things like cyber crimes, viruses, forgery, and so on and so forth, or carrying out theft. Just some of those things that we ensure. We can put policies to try and overcome them. Like, for example, in our ICT policy to have that accountability amongst us, that to know that, oh, who logged in last in this system, What were their activities? Is there somebody to supervise, somebody to oversee some of these things to ensure that nothing that is criminal or unethical happens also with you, those of you who are using the system. So essentially, it is for the ICT profession to know that they have a responsibility to protect the community which they serve, especially with the systems that are being implemented. I know most of you must have read the issue of Zinod, what happened with at Chambogo. And I remember this was one of the things that I specifically had a big fight with at UMU. And I remember pointing out, stating it very, very strongly that, look, this Zinod system, ICT doesn't even have back-end access. But these guys even have the capacity to change results. I don't know, I remember it was one of the things that really was a strong point for me. So now you can see what has happened with Chambogo University, that kind of situation. So essentially, when we're looking at ethical behaviors, it's an important point for any organization, really important point. You can think also for yourselves what kind of actions you may have. Do you have any ethical considerations? For example, if I asked any of you, do you have any structures to ensure that ethical behavior is there for your employees, and also specifically also for the IT professions within your organization? Is there anyone who may have any idea on that, or any testimony on how ethics are being handled in your department right now?
Maybe if I may comment, as we have organization mandatory trainings for ethics, and mandatory is like tests that we get certificates for, but it's part of what they need from us as an audit firm.
Okay. I think being an audit firm, I think that one becomes a key point. But it's also important that all of us think about it. Why? One of the things that happens is that you build confidence, for example, with your users, with your employers. You build that confidence that they know that they can trust you with their data, with their systems, and so on and so forth, that they know they will not be abused at the end of the day. So it is something that it's important to think about, especially when you're coming up with your ICT policies, to have that ethical element and to ensure that it's visible for all stakeholders. So one of the ways we can do that is to have the professional code of ethics. So this can be something that can be developed for the department, just to have that confidence that your particular members of the department, these are the rules and principles that they abide with. So, like some of the things I'd mentioned, why have it? First of all, it is to improve ethical decision making. So even for staff members, they know what it is that is guiding them. Your ICT department, they know there are certain standards that are guiding them, but also to build that trust and respect from the general public and also from the different stakeholders. It can also be used when you are evaluating or benchmarking. You can use it as a means to say, okay, how are we performing in this area? These are just some IT professional organizations. We don't have a universal code of ethics, let's say like medicine, but these are just some organizations that have something that can be guided that can guide your ICT departments. There are also certifications, for example, like David gave us an example. There may also be certifications that you may decide to carry out, but these are also voluntary, passing of written exams, and so on and so forth. So let's however also state that writing an exam on ethics does not necessarily make you ethical. Why? At UMU, I think at UMU every single course has a program, has a course or a module on ethics. But the same people who are writing that exam on ethics may also cheat in that very exam. So it's not a must that it's going to make you ethical, but it can raise awareness. It can raise awareness on what ethics is. There are also certain governments which can provide you with licensing when you have certain professional codes of ethics. And also, there are also even punishments for breaking of any of these ethical codes. But however, just also to point out that as far as IT is concerned, you don't have an acceptable body of knowledge saying this is what guides ICT or IT. But still, that doesn't stop to have those ethical guidelines. Just some common ethical issues that we deal with. I've already mentioned some of them. Issues on software piracy, appropriate use of computing resources. Then when we come to data, this one we've discussed at length. These are at least 3 common areas that we focus on, and you'll see them in any ICT policy. In the policy levels, how do we see that? We see with what is seen as acceptable or unacceptable behavior as one uses a network. The violations, what possible punishment one may incur. The policy can decide to look at the appropriate use of resources, looks at company software, protection of data, the incorporation of a firewall. You can even have something on network security and whatever it is embedded within the policy. We can have maybe just a brief discussion on just certain ethical issues that may have arisen from adoption of ICT in our daily lives. But I think one of them that I can give is for example, what has happened at Chambogo University, where you have names in a system have been deliberately deleted from the system, and you have fingers being pointed. It's so and so, it is so and so. That is just such an example of unethical behavior. You can give maybe if somebody has another situation that may have happened at their workplace or they've heard of something.
Sometimes, doctor, there is a deliberate disclosure of information.
Okay, yeah. Yes, any particular example? No? We can think of any. I remember when I just joined UMU, there was a student where I think somebody got hold of the students' inappropriate pictures, and these other students started to send it on the university mail system. And I remember at the time the head ICT got into the system and simply deleted, but it had already happened. People had viewed, something like that. And sometimes the users may hide their identity, may decide to use a fake email address, things like that, where you find cyberbullying actually happens. But yeah, these are just some of the simple ethical issues, but however, you see that they are closely tied to the policy, and which policy then is then closely tied to any system. So do we have any questions so far on the issue of ethics?
No, doctor.
No, we are fine. Okay, it's 5 minutes to 9. Should we, do we want to, can we continue with the next session, or you may be tired?
I think let's push on up 9:30.
Okay, okay, so let's quickly look at our next session, which is looking at designing data architecture. Now, you may have seen this when you are doing enterprise architecture, yes or no? Did you look at designing?
Yes, we look at it.
Yes.
Okay, so essentially this is repeating. Do we need to repeat it?
Yes,
Doctor,
doctor, it's okay. A lot has changed. A lot has been going on.
Okay, so let's just see if what it may be. I may be simply repeating, but let me know if there's anything new. So essentially, it is when we're looking at data, for any organization, we're looking at its collection, storage, processing, how it's controlled, distributed within the organization. So when we're looking at this at the level, at the enterprise level, we are essentially saying that ICT needs to have, let's say, like a bird's eye view of how data is being collected and stored and so on, how it's being distributed across the entire enterprise. Now, when ICT looks at it, you may find at different levels with different users, this data is being viewed in different formats. For example, at one point, someone may be using a spreadsheet to look at this data. At another point, at one point, somebody is using a spreadsheet, another point, another person is using a personal database. And this database may not be visible to others. So what you're seeing is should I say what they call package systems, where the data itself, you don't have a harmonized or a clear picture of how data should be flowing, who should have access to it, in what format should it be, who shouldn't have access to it, who should be sharing it, and so on and so forth. So the enterprise data is essentially it is to see the entirety of it, not simply from one user's perspective, but the entirety of it, the overall structure of it, how the entire data throughout is going to be, how this data is going to be collected, how it is processed, how it's supposed to be distributed, who should control it, how should it be managed, and so on and so forth. So what essentially we're trying, what this is trying to look at is that data which is highly dispersed, what kind of controls should be there. So let's just, now when we look at the enterprise level, you may find, when we start looking at data at the enterprise level, you may find quite a great deal of loopholes, yeah? You may find quite a great deal of loopholes. Let me just give you an example. I remember when we started looking at results at UMU, you'd find that in the Faculty of Business Administration, the way the format of the result is the way it is being seen is not the same way the Faculty of Science looks at it. It's also a different way the Faculty of the Institute of Ethics looks at it. So you find in that situation, you have different formats and different meanings. For example, the decimal place is a key point for business administration, but it may not be a key point for the Institute of Ethics. Then you have the issue of duplicated data, yeah, where you have something being existing in different formats in different areas. The quality of data, yeah, I remember the quality of data was also another key point. What do I mean? In the Faculty of Science, you might find a module called Java 2, but in the registry, you had object-oriented programming with Java, something like that. And these are supposed to be the same course units. So when we decide to do to have that bird's eye view, or rather the enterprise data, you may find yourself that you have some serious issues with your data that really needs to be looked at. So the purpose of having that bird's eye view of your data at the enterprise level is essentially to pick out areas that need improvement, to look at areas that may need to be corrected, and also to avoid certain serious business and technical problems that may arise from poor storage and processing of data. And here I'm sure many of you can give us examples from your different workplaces. So what is the way forward? So the way forward essentially is to have that design, or to have that data architecture where we actually map out how our data is flowing from one point to the next. And here we deal with what is referred to as modeling. Now, please bear in mind that in Moodle, I've actually uploaded articles on, first of all, on the ethical elements and also on data modeling that can give you some more guidance, some in-depth discussion on this. So we deal with modeling to help us understand how our the enterprise data is looking like. We basically develop an enterprise data architecture. So what is data architecture? I'm sure you know this already. So you know that these are rules, the policies and standards and models that govern and define the type of data we collect and how it is used and how it is accessed. We also use it to see the as-is situation, especially when we want to align our data. Especially when we want to align, we can use data architecture to understand the as-is situation and then make a transition to where we want to be. So this can be an extremely important point when we are trying to design new systems, especially systems that are now focused on enterprise architecture. So the data architecture helps us to design, to create, and deploy and manage our data architect. So a data architecture model basically is the beginning foundation for us to have a data strategy. So when we have the as is, the current situation, we know we can now develop where we want to go, the target that we want to meet. We then are able also to make a business process improvements, especially when we find those loopholes that we're talking about, like duplication, or we have a situation where we have data which is supposed to be shared, supposed to be distributed across the network, is actually sitting in just one particular situation. It also helps us with decisions on new systems or changes that we need to make with new systems. when we need to look at data warehousing, integration, and reporting procedures, basically those improvements to our business processes. Another term I'm sure which you've heard of is the ADA term, which is essentially the master blueprint, which looks at aligning your IT programs and information assets to your business strategy. I'm sure these you've seen already when you are doing the enterprise architecture. So the ADM model essentially allows you to do a data strategy, what we've discussed before, improve your business processes, help you with your future decisions, then basically also looking at data warehousing. This is just a summary. This diagram, I'm sure you've seen it before, on EDA, the different levels that points that it helps you to achieve. But we're just going to go through essentially the levels the 4 different levels that we begin with as we model our data architecture. So the first one is the high level data model, that is HLDM. So this one, essentially what it does is it helps you pick out the business entities and their relationships. Now, if you've done object-oriented programming, I'm sure any of you who has done object-oriented programming, you know what it means to pick out the objects and the relationships between those objects. So just have a diagram here. It may not be very clear, but imagine a company that rents out its cars. So the first object you may have in that business entity would be the vehicle. Yeah, that's one object that you can have. Then you have the renting process, and the renting process has options. There are different options that we may have, maybe long term, or then when we have the vehicle itself, under the vehicle, you have the different types of vehicle. They could be a car or a van. So these, as you can see, these are business entities. And I'm sure each one of you can think in terms of where you are, the different business entities or objects that your organization or business deals with. If you look at a university like UMU, you could think of in terms of staff. And when you have staff, you have your academic staff, you have your administrative staff. Then you have your students. And when you have your students, you have your full-time undergraduate and postgraduate. You have your full-time students, you have your part-time, you have your distance learning. Already those are different objects that we can pick out. So this is the high-level data model. And here you think about their different attributes, yeah, the different data types that we are going to pick out of them. So for example, here with the vehicle, you think about the registration mark or number, the model, the first when it is registered, and also for the other different objects, you can think of the different data types that may be needed from it. Now, this kind of image, I'm sure you've seen with object-oriented programming. Yes or no?
Yes, doctor. Actually, it was more in advanced, I think, database management.
Yeah. Even
by
also
Martin Kubanja.
Yes, yes. And also, if anyone has done programming with Java, these are the beginning steps that one deals with when, especially because Java is highly object-oriented programming. So this would be the format in which you first think about your scenario before you actually begin to code. Now, from the high level, from the high level data model, we come to the realization views. So let me just show you the image here, or rather, let's first just have a small discussion. Now, if we're thinking about the rental car, we may, in the realization view, we might say that, okay, there might be a system called car fleet, which is going to deal with, which is an in-house fleet management system, which is going to deal with the objects, the different business entities. Yeah. So this car fleet would be the first realization to say this system is going to deal with the business entities. Then you may have van care, which is outsourced to handle the maintenance of these systems. Then you have the rental system, which is going to deal with the different entities to actually rent. So in this case, what is happening when you're at the realization view, you're actually looking at the systems that are going to interact with the different business entities. Now here you also identify the kind of data these systems are going to need to access. Yeah, the kind of data that they are going to need to access, or the kind of data that they handle. So this is the second level. So at this point, you may need to know, okay, car fleet. We said car fleet is in-house. So it is supposed to manage the cars that are there, to know this car has what car is available, in what state is it, and so on and so forth. Now, van care is actually outsourced, so it's not necessarily part of. It's not in-house. It's out. It's external. What kind of information? What kind of data should it have access to? Considering it is outsourced. Is there any information that it shouldn't have access to, and so on and so forth? Rental system is obviously going to be used by the customers. So what should they be looking at? What kind of information should they look at? Where, what information should they not have access to? What information should they have access to? So this one already tells you, we already tell you if they have too much access or too little access. Now we have the third level is source and consumer model. So this one looks at the correlationships between the various realizations. Yeah, these other systems that we're talking about, these different realizations. What is the relationship between these different systems, should I say? So here you're looking at the fleet, the car fleet. Who is it that is relating to car fleet? The customer. Then what kind of relationship is between the different business entities? You see here, the rental has a copy, but the car fleet is a master. It has greater access than the person who is accessing the rental system, because the person who is accessing the rental system may be a customer, or this, for example, here it's sales department. So you're looking at levels of rights and what people should or may or may not access. The fourth level is transportation and transformation model. So in this one, we are now looking at the way the actual implementation of the systems. Who is it that makes changes? When changes are made or things are moved from one system to the other. So this also looks at the transformation model, actually looks at system interfaces. It looks at the physical system interfaces and how exactly they are beginning to interact. So here is an example of an interface that is going to access the car fleet. What exactly does the car fleet interface, what changes are allowed? In other words, if somebody is accessing the car fleet entity, what changes is this person allowed to make? When they make those changes, how does it affect, for example, the rental? How does it affect van care? And so on and so forth. So we are trying to see that when a transformation is made, how far does it go in making a change? And when it makes that change, how is it, the integrity of the data? How is the integrity of the data affected? So this is when we look at, this is the transformation and transportation model, that which is going to make the physical change to your database. So in a nutshell, I'm sure I'm repeating this. Why do we have data architecture? So first of all, it is to gain a better understanding of our data. And this is extremely important for ICT. Remember again, because it's coming from the ICT policy, which then comes to the ethical elements. So why should we have a better understanding? So that first of all, we can better govern our data strategy. We can have a better ICT data strategy, a better data security policy, and so on and so forth. To gain, first of all, that confidence, that our stakeholders have that confidence that we are going to keep that data protected. We need to have, to guide developments across systems, yeah? To guide developments across systems, that we know that in case there is a loophole somewhere, you're protecting it. In case there is a security breach somewhere, you're protecting it. And when you have any initiative, new initiatives with your data warehousing, you know where exactly you're going to pick your data. You know how information is flowing and what needs to be protected. And finally, to have improved business process initiatives. Basically, going back to the previous, to supporting our session on ethics, this interconnects with what we were talking about earlier. Now, if you're carrying out data architecture, what approach should you use? I'm sure you looked at TOGAF, and I'm sure you know it even better than maybe I may know it. A big expert is Mr. Wemema, but it's TOGAF would be a very good approach to do your data architecture. So I'm not going to repeat it because I'm sure you've done this before. So we may already know. Let me move this higher. Again, just go back on TOGAF. This is essentially is just going back the building blocks of just of how we carry out our data architecture. You first of all identify the data building blocks, or rather your business entities. Develop your class diagrams. Basically, what we're looking at were the class diagrams. We looked at area. The data dissemination, how it is being disseminated, then your data security diagrams. Identify the types of requirements to be collected. So these are your basic requirements. I'm sure you've done this before. There's nothing new about it. Then you carry out your physical data architecture. So the physical data architecture is where you actually point out what technology is going to be needs to be planned for. What new technology do we need to implement in case you have a loophole somewhere? The physical data architecture encompasses your database architecture. So the two are mutual in the architecture. So some constraints and influences to a physical data architecture. One is your enterprise requirements. So here we look at things like the economics of what will be required, what may be the most effective system, what is the acceptable performance. For example, if you have a distributed system or a distributed database, what should be the acceptable speeds? What could be reliable? Are we going to? There are situations where you may overshoot yourself and look for specifications that are too high. Then there are those which may be too low. Look at technology drivers. What may be recommended? That what may be obsolete in a few years that you may not wish to go for that. What may be too expensive. Economics, of course, is a key point. What may be the cost implications? Your business policies, the business policies are extremely important. When you're carrying out your data architecture, you need to understand what policies may exist in the different departments, what may not be shareable, what is shareable, and so on and so forth. The data processing needs. So you may want to look at how accurate you want your data to be. What may be the transactions that may be performed in high volumes, and so on and so forth. What periodic reports that may be needed. All these are things that you may need you look at as you're carrying out your physical data architecture. Modeling the as is. Remember, we talked about this earlier. When we look at the as is with the intention of carrying out an improvement. So we carry out this modeling, not just simply to understand, but also to look at what is our current situation and where do we want to go. And what is the future improvement that we need to target. And then, of course, have a timeline saying that within the next 2-3 years, we need to have maybe achieved complete integration or complete data security and so on and so forth. Now, most of the issues on improving data collection are non-technical. Yeah, so most of the issues may be non-technical. You may find certain things simply need a policy. Other things simply need governance, just improving governance rules and change control processes. So some of these things may not necessarily be that we need to have a new technology, but maybe a new policy or an improvement in our business processes. So when we're looking at improving data architecture, like we said, some of these things you may need to put up a new policy on data management. Look at what data is being stored, who is responsible, who has controls, and so on and so forth. So when we carry out our data architecture, we may find that the things that actually need to be improved may not be the technology itself. Any question? In a nutshell, that was data architecture. Like I said, I'm sure you've seen this already before.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we have seen it before in the TOGAF enterprise architecture.
Okay, so it's nothing new really. It is simply just just another guiding principle when we're looking at ICT design. It's just another guiding principle that must be in existence. Just as we said, we briefly looked at strategy. So you see that strategy guides the ICT design. We saw that benchmarking was also another key factor. Now the ethical elements also come in. now also then data architecture. So it's essentially when we're this particular module pulls everything that we had seen elsewhere and putting it into the same, just guiding our design processes at the level of the Chief Information Officer. So do we have any question? Let me look at the comments. Okay. So yes, please.
Yes, Doctor. Have you created groups? Because I remember this last assignment was a group work.
Oh, so sorry. I'm going to create the group. So I'm really sorry. I'm going to do this first thing in the morning. Yeah?
Okay, I'm going to send you the group details. The group names just.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay. So if we don't have any question, we can, I think, end here. I thank you once again for being understanding and for, giving me this time to try and complete. So again, we meet tomorrow. We have the 2 sessions and we sum up this module.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for your time too.